Hello and good day to you. You're once again welcome to MS Constructions, where we'll discuss all things engineering, architecture, and 3D modeling. Today, we'll be learning in Blender how to model a 3D art surface from a reference to the image. But before further ado, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on your notification bell to be the first to see our latest video tutorials on Blender for 3D modeling and Blender for 3D architecture. Thank you. Now, let's get straight into our video tutorial. Let's go on to import our reference image to the scene, and we can do that by choosing the reference option as shown. We'll be creating a 3D model from a reference image, and it's a table Flask. I can scroll with my middle mouse button or simply type the name of the image in my search bar. We can adjust the orientation of the reference image by selecting it and pressing Alt-R to clear rotation. Now, before we go any further, I would like to enable my screencast keys so that you can see what I'm doing even better. In edit mode, we can rotate the image along the x-axis by 90 degrees to get an upright view for ease of modeling. With the image selected, we can click on our right mouse button to toggle the options and select Trace Image to Grease Pencil. This panel pops up after your selection. You may adjust values or leave as default, then press OK. Then we have something that looks like this. We have the properties of our grease pencil here to adjust values, but we don't really need to adjust anything for now. You can see that the grease pencil is up here as a separate object from the image, which is labeled empty. We no longer need empty. We can delete it right away. With the grease pencil selected in object mode, go to object on the top panel and glide down to select convert. Select mesh to convert the grease pencil to an editable mesh with vertices and edges. Once we've converted into a mesh, we can tap into our edit mode to work on it. To work on the mesh, we can toggle our vertex select option to delete all vertices that are not needed in our model. In this tutorial, we won't be modeling the cover of the Flask, so we can go on to delete it as well. So what I want to do is I want to use this side to model the other side by creating a manually mirrored duplicate as shown. Toggle viewport to numpad 1 in order to further edit the duplicate. Rotate the duplicate along the z-axis by 90 degrees as shown. Move the vertices to fit the object as shown and rotate along the x-axis by 90 degrees to create a mirrored set of the original vertices. Now, all we need is to join the vertices of the objects on this side in a way that will look similar to what we have on the other side. And to do that, we can click on these vertices, press F to create an edge, then subdivide the edges as shown. We can also join the vertices at the bottom as shown. We can use our proportional editing to adjust this in order to align the curve with the existing geometry of the Flask. The next thing we are going to do now is to select all, then we can go on to locate our spin tool as shown. Select the tool and spin the selected object 360 degrees as shown. Now, while this gives us a model close enough to our reference image, we still need to work on it to get a near perfect hard surface. And in order to do that, we can toggle on Edge Select mode and work on the mesh in X-ray view in order to see and get rid of the parts of the model that are not needed, such as this strut here. Now we can select all, toggle back to solid view, and deselect the faces that we need to preserve on our model, as we intend to delete the faces that remain selected when we are done deselecting all the faces that we need. Now we can toggle on the X-ray view to see what's selected and use numpad 3 view to continue with our edits. We want to cut the throat from this point, and in order to do that, we can toggle on our edge select mode, then go back to our solid view to select the edges around the area to make it easier to deselect the ones we need more precisely. With the edges of the interior of the flask selected, we can now go on to deselect the edges we want and delete the rest. Next thing I would like to do is to work on the bottom of the flask, as it doesn't quite look elegant and realistic for a flask. We can select the bottom of the flask as shown and delete faces. We can now create a new face by selecting the edges as shown and pressing F. This new face can be modeled as desired. We can extend the base of the flask as shown. We can also bevel the edges using 15 segments and 75 mm for the width. We can toggle to object mode, and I think it looks better now. Next thing I would like to do is to dissolve these edges in order to create a groove that will separate the bottom part of the flask. Then we can select any of the remaining edges as shown and scale it down. I scaled down along the X, Y, and Z axes by 0.975. We can tap back to object mode to see what it looks like. I think it looks okay, and we can proceed. In order to make this to look even better, we can scale it along the Z axis as shown. You can tap into object mode to see what it looks like. You can shade smooth to make it to look even more visually appealing. We can also add a subsurface division modifier to make it look even smoother. Now, in order to model the design at the base of the flask, we can use the tissue modifier. You may download and install the tissue modifier add-on on any version of Blender you're using. It can be searched on Blender add-ons and installed. In case you don't have the tissue modifier, you may go to your preferences to download the add-on. Now, to use the tissue modifier, we need a component object and a base. In this case, our base is the flask, but we can use a rhomb to model our component object. A rhomb is available in curve as shown when you enable the extra curve object add-on. So you may adjust the size of your rhomb as shown. I rather think it helps to make the room much smaller than the base object. We can switch the shape from 2D to 3D, leave the rest as default and adjust the location of the room to work on it. Rotate the room 90 degrees along the x-axis. Go to curve settings, use 5 mm for the bevel depth and geometry extrusion. With the room selected, convert the object from a curve to a mesh as shown. Select the Flask and tap into Edit mode. Select the faces that we want to apply the tissue modifier. Make the faces a separate object from the Flask. This helps us to easily tessellate the component to the selected base without applying it to the entire Flask. We may also join the tessellated base after applying the tissue modifier. We may go on to rename the grease pencil object as shown. Once you have the tissue modifier add-on enabled, you can press N to open the panel as shown and select tissue. In order to effectively apply the tissue modifier, we need to apply our subsoft modifier to create more faces on our base. We can make even more faces on the base by adding loop cuts in order to enable the tessellation to be more detailed. To effectively apply a tissue modifier on an object, the orientation of the component matters, as this determines the part of the geometry of the tissue tessellate component that will be projected onto the surface of the base. Therefore, we need to rotate the ROM along the Z and Y axis by 90 degrees to ensure that its orientation matches the orientation that we want embedded onto our base mesh. In object mode, select the ROM first and then the base of the Flask, then click on Tessellate. Leave these settings as default, then press OK to apply the tissue tessellation on the Flask base. The tessellation object is immediately generated around the Flask base and you should get something like this. I think this looks okay. We can select the tessellation and scale down along the X and Y axis to fit the geometry of the Flask base. I think this looks okay for now. However, you can change the viewport shading from Studio to Matcap as shown in order to provide a better and more realistic hard surface texture on our Flask in our solid viewport. This is it for today's video tutorial on how to model hard surfaces using a reference image and leveraging the spin tool. I sincerely hope that you were able to learn a thing or two that can be useful in your personal projects in Blender. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tutorial videos and tips on Blender. Turn on your notification bell to be the first to see our latest tutorial videos on how to use Blender for 3D modeling and Blender for 3D architecture. Thanks for watching and bye for now.